So many people do everything they can to avoid failure. They understandably see it as bad. They hate the feeling of not living up to their own expectations of themselves and thus do everything in their power to avoid feeling that way. I would venture to say that based on how I feel about my own failures, that 99% of people listening to this feel the same way. Maybe a tiny portion of people listening to this embrace failure, but it's certainly a minority. So don't be too hard on yourself because this is a completely normal way to feel. But just because it's prevalent and normal does not mean this should be the default. So how can you work on embracing failure? In my own career, I've dealt with failure by realizing that success is completely relative. But what do I mean by success is relative? Let's take my golf game, for example. My success on the golf course would be a failure for a PGA Tour player. If I shot 70, 74, 71, 72 in a tournament and finished top 10, I would be ecstatic. But if a PGA Tour player shoots those same scores, they would see it as a failure. First of all, they probably wouldn't even have gotten the chance to shoot 71, 72 on the weekend because they would have missed the cut. And two, those scores just aren't good for a PGA Tour player. They wouldn't finish top 10. They would see those scores as a failure. And to take my role as a mental coach, for example, the current level of players that I work with would seem like a failure to a mental coach that has been in the business and worked with the top players in the world for decades. If Bob Rotella suddenly didn't have any PGA Tour or LPGA Tour players and only had junior players, college players, amateur players, and some mini tour players, he would have thought that the bottom dropped out of his business. But for me, I'm thrilled to be working with the players that I currently work with. I'm filled with energy after every single session. And on the other side, a lot of my failures would be successes for other people. If I shot an 81, that was a grind all day trying to find my game, and I was dejected about my own ability and frustrated, it would be a success for probably 90% of golfers. My dad loves it when he shoots low 80s and fully considers it a success. And depending on where you are in your journey, low 80s might be a really good score. You might average upper 80s, and low 80s is your goal. So low 80s would be a success to you. And if you told me a year ago that I'd be working with the players that I work with now and getting to see players as often as I do now, I would be thrilled, and it would be a success to me back then. So who am I to think that my successes and failures are the standard by which all success and failure should be judged? Maybe what I considered a success 3 years ago would be tiny now. Once you believe this about your own game, you realize how much it levels your playing field. When you realize what is a mountain to you is a molehill to others, it makes the process a lot less intimidating. So now that we've leveled your journey and made your successes and failures much less of strong emotional events, you can look at each logically. You can navigate through failures quickly and see what needs to be worked on and improved, and then you can move on. When a failure seems like a monumental event and you're filled with emotion about how terrible it was, you're probably not going to learn much. But when you have the perspective that it wasn't even a failure, it was simply another step on a very long path, then you say, okay, that step is over. Let's take the next step. When you're hiking a trail up a mountain, you don't reconsider every step you took, wonder if it was a good one or a bad one, dwell on how terrible of a step it was, get all emotional about how terrible it was, and sit down and stop taking steps. No, by that point, you would have taken 20 more steps already. And so it is with your golf journey. Don't even give yourself enough time to dwell on your successes or failures because you have already moved on to the next step. All right, thanks for watching this video. If you got any value out of this, I would love it if you shared it with someone else. That's the best way to spread the value of this episode and future episodes and past episodes. So share it with someone. That would mean everything to me. All right, thanks. See you next time.